In April of 2020, the most visited city in the United States went quiet. Not slowly, not gradually, overnight. Disney World closed its gates on March 15th. Universal followed the same day. SeaWorld 2 days after that. Within 72 hours, a city of 2.7 million people that had spent 60 years building its entire identity around the business of entertaining visitors from everywhere else on Earth suddenly had no visitors, no buses, no queues, no family photos in front of Cinderella's castle. What happened next revealed something that most people who visit Orlando never think about, and something that most people who live there have been quietly living with for decades. Unemployment in Orange County hit 23% within 6 weeks. 1 in 4 working adults in the county had lost their income. The city did not just slow down, it collapsed. Because a city that has oriented its entire economy around a single industry has, by definition, placed every single resident's financial stability on that industry continuing without interruption. Orlando receives approximately 74 million visitors per year. That is more than New York City, more than Las Vegas, more than any other destination in the United States. The tourism industry generates roughly $75 billion in annual economic activity in the region, and the median household income of the people who actually live there sits below the national average. The housing crisis is accelerating faster than almost anywhere else in the South, and the infrastructure serving 2.7 million permanent residents was designed almost entirely around moving tourists between theme parks. The most visited city in America is not flourishing. It is being consumed by the very industry that built it. The instinctive assumption about a city receiving 74 million visitors and $75 billion in tourism activity is that the residents must be doing reasonably well. All that spending has to go somewhere. Hotels, restaurants, transport, retail, the money circulates. Local businesses thrive. Tax revenues fund public services. That is not what the data shows. What Orlando has built is an economy that is extraordinarily effective at generating tourist spending and remarkably poor at converting that spending into durable resident wealth. The money flows in from everywhere. Then it flows straight back out again to Disney shareholders in Burbank, to hotel REIT investors on Wall Street, to short-term rental operators who have never set foot in Orange County. The residents are the infrastructure through which the tourist economy operates. They are not, in any meaningful sense, its primary beneficiaries. Orlando is not a unique accident. It is the most extreme and fully realized version of a development model being pursued by dozens of cities across the world, from Barcelona to Bali to Lisbon, that have decided to orient their economies primarily around visitor spending. Understanding what that model actually produces for the people who live inside it is one of the most practically important urban economic questions of the next 20 years. Because the tourism industry is not contracting, it is expanding, and the Orlando template is being exported. Reason 1. The monoculture trap. Economic monocultures are fragile by definition. A town built entirely around coal is vulnerable to the price of coal. A city built entirely around tourism is vulnerable to anything that stops tourists from coming. Orlando built its monoculture with extraordinary commitment. Leisure and hospitality accounts for roughly 22% of all employment in the metro area, more than double the national average for that sector. The supply chains, the service networks, the tax base, the small business ecosystem, all of it evolved to serve the tourism machine rather than the residential population. COVID did not create Orlando's structural vulnerability. It simply made it impossible to ignore. The 23% unemployment figure from spring 2020 was not just an economic statistic. It was a direct measurement of how many households had no meaningful financial buffer between their employment in the tourism industry and complete income collapse. Unlike cities with diversified economies, where a hospitality collapse is painful but contained, Orlando had no significant economic cushion outside the parks. When the tourists stopped, the city stopped. The recovery, when it came, did not fix the underlying condition. It just refilled the same fragile structure with the same fragile workforce and resumed the same fragile dependency. By 2023, visitor numbers had returned to record levels. The structural vulnerability was exactly where it had been before. Reason 2. The housing crisis the parks built. In 2019, the median home price in the Orlando metro area was approximately $248,000. By 2024, that figure had risen to over $385,000, a 55% increase in 5 years, against wage growth that tracked nowhere close to that trajectory. Two mechanisms drove this. The first was the nationwide pandemic-era migration into Florida's relatively affordable Sunbelt markets. The second, more specific to Orlando, was the short-term rental explosion. Osceola County, which sits directly south of Disney World and forms the lower corridor of the tourist zone, now contains one of the highest concentrations of licensed short-term rental properties in the United States. Over 50,000 registered units. Entire residential neighborhoods that were built to house working families were systematically converted into de facto hotel stock. A 3-bedroom home that previously housed a local family now cycles through 40 different sets of tourists per year, each paying nightly rates that make annual residential leasing financially irrational for the landlord. The residents displaced by that conversion did not disappear. They competed for a shrinking pool of available long-term rental stock, pushing rents up 30% between 2020 and 2023 in a market where average hospitality sector wages grew by less than half that. The parks attract the tourists. The tourists demand accommodation. The accommodation absorbs the housing stock. The housing stock shortage crushes the residents who serve the tourists. It is a closed loop that compounds with every new hotel announcement, every new short-term rental listing, every new record-breaking attendance figure. Reason 3. The wage ceiling nobody talks about. Disney World is the largest single-site employer in the United States, with approximately 77,000 employees on its Orlando property alone. After years of union negotiations, its starting wage reached $18 per hour in 2023, a figure the company publicized extensively as evidence of its commitment to workers. What that framing omits is the structural effect that a 77,000-person anchor employer paying at that level has on the surrounding labor market. When the dominant employer in a regional economy sets a wage floor, surrounding businesses face pressure to match it, but also face an implicit ceiling defined by what the dominant employer considers competitive. Orlando's hospitality and service sector has one of the lowest median wages of any major metro area in Florida. The entire labor market has calibrated itself around an industry that, by its fundamental business model, requires enormous volumes of low to moderate wage workers serving very high volumes of customers. A Disney cast member earning $18 an hour in Orlando, where the cost of living has accelerated sharply, takes home less real purchasing power than the same role paid $16 an hour in many Midwestern cities with significantly lower housing costs. The nominal wage number looks reasonable. The actual standard of living it buys in the specific market it operates in is considerably less so. And the surrounding economy, shaped entirely around the same tourism industry, offers few alternative pathways that pay materially better. The straightforward version of this story is that Orlando is a victim of corporate greed, that Disney and the hotel chains and the short-term rental platforms extracted the value and left residents with the costs. And there is genuine truth in that framing. But the more complete picture is messier. Orlando made a conscious and rational economic choice over 60 years to pursue tourism as its primary development strategy. That choice generated genuine infrastructure, genuine employment, genuine tax revenue, and a genuinely recognizable global identity. The city exists at its current scale largely because of the industry now putting it under strain. The problem is not that tourism came to Orlando. The problem is that Orlando built so completely around it that the city forgot to build anything else. No serious tech sector, no significant manufacturing base, no major financial or professional services cluster to speak of. Every economic development decision for 6 decades ran through the filter of whether it served the tourism machine. What Orlando is experiencing now is not an attack from outside. It is the compounding cost of a single bet placed repeatedly over a very long time. The tourists are not destroying Orlando. Orlando built the conditions for this outcome. 1 theme park, 1 hotel tower, and 1 rezoned neighborhood at a time. The tourists just kept showing up.